I hope people are engaged with the concerns, the issues of our contemporary debates politically will find as interesting as those who are more scholarly and are interested in the conceptual arguments about nationalism, patriotism, nationhood, and so on. It's all there.
What was even more interesting is as I read the book, the news around us seemed to develop around the arguments that you were making in the book as well. So I think that it's an interesting time to have this conversation. For our audience who has not read the book, The Battle of Belonging basically examines the idea of patriotism, nationalism, what it's like to belong to a country. And what does that mean? Does it have to do with your race? Does it have to do with your language? Does it have to do with some sort of shared identity? And where patriotism comes in. So do you feel that kinship to the race, to the religion, to the identity, or to the idea of the country itself? Ironically, while we have this conversation, while this conversation is being put together, Mr. Shashi Tharoor himself is facing multiple FIRs for sedition, which by definition is a crime against the state. It's a crime against the nation. And we'll also take a look at what's happening with dissent altogether and how have we reached a point where disagreeing or dissent is being looked at as anti-national. So does that make you less patriotic in some way, or does it hurt the identity of who we are? Before we get into the thick of discussing what's going on around us, Mr. Tharoor, the book very interestingly places before the audience your own history of where you were born, where you grew up, and how that affects your identity. I don't believe you've written about this in the past before. You haven't been, you weren't born in India. And
that's right.
You've given up multiple options of different, nationalities and other passports, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, I was born in the UK, and my parents moved here when I was 2.5. So the initial choice was theirs. They saw themselves as Indian. They came back to an India relatively just a decade after independence, a decade and a bit. So they saw themselves part of this great, exciting adventure of independent India. But I, by virtue of birth, particularly at that time, and to non-diplomatic parents, I have the entitlement to a British passport, which is in fact something that even tomorrow I could exercise and have repeatedly been invited to exercise and have consistently refused. And I talk about some of the reasons in the book. I also, of course, spent the bulk of my adult life abroad. When I turned 50, I think I had essentially spent 34 years living in foreign countries. And since the last 18 of those had been in the US, purely on terms of longevity, I could have gone the green card route fairly routinely upon my departure from the UN, but I chose not to. I made a conscious decision to come back as my parents had, as my father had. And I must say that I'm acutely conscious that in his case, he regretted that decision after some years, as India took a certain direction that in economic terms left people like him, the salaried middle class, feeling rather frustrated. In my case, that's not my problem. My problem is much more that the India I came back to serve through entry into politics and public life has been or is still in the process of being pushed and shaped and shoveled into something that it was never meant to be, according to its own constitution, which enshrined a notion of Indian nationhood that emerged from the freedom struggle. So this book, in many ways, is an exploration of all those fundamental issues, Faye. It's what's Indian nationhood all about, starting indeed with the way I feel Indian, why I feel Indian, but also what anyone in this country, irrespective of their caste, their creed, their language, their region, their place of birth, is entitled to feel under the provisions of our constitution. But those are provisions that are fundamentally challenged in spirit, in context, and increasingly in daily practice by the ruling forces in our country today. So in many ways, it's both a very contemporary book. It's semi-autobiographical, yet it's semi-theoretical, because I talk about the evolution of the concept of nationhood worldwide before I bring it down to India. It's partly sort of constitutional theory, because I discussed the nature of the Constitution and its application and evolution, and it's partially sheer straightforward politics, because the events of the last 6 years figure very strongly in the final third of the book. So you've got all of these things, and it's a book that I hope people are engaged with the concerns, the issues of our contemporary debates politically will find as interesting as those who are more scholarly and are interested in the conceptual arguments about nationalism, patriotism, nationhood, and so on. It's all there.
If you've enjoyed the conversation that you just heard, do subscribe to our channel for much more.